Those of us who've been here on YouTube for long enough will have surely seen an almost infinite amount of worst games ever. Games that everyone will unanimously agree are absolutely terrible. Well, that's exactly why I started Trash Classics. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes these games are victims of circumstance alone. See, all it takes is the right content creator to make a negative video on something and bam, potentially millions of people have already written it off without ever experiencing it for themselves. And when I describe this cycle, I can think of no better game to use as an example than Dream Factory and Squaresoft's joint venture, The Bouncer, a game that's been getting a bum rap for years, and as a personal interest, I'm actually a bouncer myself, so today let's see if we can't give a little credit to a game that might just deserve a little more than what it got. And while we're at it, maybe figure out why 3 bouncers spend an entire game without checking one single ID. So without further ado, let's jump right in.
The Bouncer.
It's pretty damn hard to accurately explain the excitement that came with the beginning of the 2000s. Not only were we getting a brand new console generation, but this may have been the largest leap in graphical horsepower I'll likely see in my lifetime. The PS1 had blown my mind with the sheer amount of landmark titles to be found in its library, so it goes without saying I followed the news cycle surrounding the PS2's imminent launch like a hawk. My favorite magazine, PSM, would have full 2-page spreads dedicated to screenshots taken from the new console, and Tech TV's Extended Play would often play trailers for planned launch titles, but it was always this trailer right here that got my heart racing. First off, I was blown away by the comparatively incredible graphics on display, and even though it was being fed through the lowest bitrate imaginable on my shitty internet connection, I could tell the cutscenes were running at a buttery smooth 60 frames per second. Now, I'm not really sure why, but this sort of cemented The Bouncer as a kind of lightning rod for all these nostalgic memories. And, you know, maybe I'm easy to please, but I still get a kick out of seeing Squaresoft's name on anything that isn't an amazing Japanese RPG. Not that The Bouncer doesn't at least have RPG-like qualities, which I guess is a good sign that we need to get down to business here. The Bouncer is a 3D beat-em-up, kind of, sort of. I say sort of because it does a lot of things ass backwards from what you would expect from the genre. For starters, the story takes a front and center position, which is about as far from the norm as you can get. And on top of that, the game features a character progression mechanic where the player can spend points earned from fighting on upping stats or learning new moves. Of course, all of that pales in comparison to the mechanics. Yeah, you could say the Bouncer marched to the beat of its own drum. Developed by Dream Factory, The Bouncer fit nicely with the dev's previous work, specifically Urgai's and Tobal No. 1. In this game, wind-up animations are long, interruptible, and physics are, well, inconsistent at best. Now, this sounds like a recipe for disaster, and maybe it is, but The Bouncer is just too damn cool for that to matter. Sure, an enemy can ragdoll one of your fellow bouncers and send them flying into you, causing insane damage. And yeah, these same ragdoll mechanics means that lining up air juggles and OTGs work maybe 50% of the time, but when you're able to wrap your head around the game's inner workings and make short work of a room full of bad guys, well, there's just no better feeling. Plus, there's a few value perks too, first of which being the story. Sure, a beat-em-up can get kinda old quick, but the heavy emphasis on telling a Squaresoft tier story can make things flow much more fluidly. The general idea is you play as 3 bouncers working at a particularly seedy little bar called Fate. On what seems like a typical night, our 3 security professionals find themselves at the center of a kidnapping plot enacted by members of the Mikado Group, a wealthy and powerful megacorporation on the verge of solving all of the world's energy problems And this is where things get interesting. At any point, you're able to take control of any character you want, and the bouncer you choose will dictate how you experience the story. Each character has their own backstory and relatively interesting personality, which makes the short playtime sting a bit less. I was able to finish the game in about 2 hours my first run, but I was pretty damn quick to start up a new game and see what was going on with the other characters right after that. Of course, the main story beats remain the same, but hey, it still beats the RE2 Remake's B scenarios, right? And after you've torn through what is a pretty short game, you'll find another RPG staple, the New Game Plus. Using this extra game mechanic, you can run through the story again, this time keeping all of your gained stats and moves. And if you're asking me, this is when the bouncer really starts to shine. With a powered up character and a huge list of moves at your disposal, the combat stops being so unforgiving and really takes on the form I imagine the devs wanted it to have the whole time. Sure, you're still at the mercy of some crappy physics, and no, the fact that it gets better on your second or third playthrough is not a good excuse for mistakes, but I find this game genuinely fun despite all that. I mean, I really do have a blast every time I boot it up, and while I may try to snap my PS2 controller every third fight or so, I just can't deny how engaging it can be. Of course, I'm perfectly willing to admit that a lot of this has to do with overdose levels of nostalgia derived from an excited me consuming any media I could regarding the not yet released PS2. At the time, I just couldn't imagine games looking any better than this, and well, I guess now's a solid time to talk about video. The Bouncer is still a very striking game to look at least technically speaking. Tetsuya Nomura being involved in this project is probably pretty obvious by now. I mean, the guy rarely deviated from his comfort zone, and this game is seated well within the spiky hair, big shoed, early 2000s look that he was known for. Fashion choices here are so loud they can be seen from low orbit, and if you're not a fan of how old RPGs used to look, you aren't exactly going to be listing The Bouncer as the game that brought you over. But I gotta say, I still have a soft spot for all this. I mean, I did grow up with this sort of look, and the young thrash metal / hardcore punk fan in me loves seeing a character with studded leather jacket, complete with back patch. Aside from the surface level stuff, the Bouncer is well known for keeping a rock solid 60 frames per second, a feat that wasn't all that common at the time, at least as far as other consoles were concerned. This blazing fast frame rate is what attracted me to the cutscenes as a kid. At the time, I didn't quite know why, but CGs from this game and Silent Hill 2 always looked really cool to me, and it wouldn't be till I got much older that I started learning about how video output was measured and the difference between the PS1's frames per second and the PS2's interlaced fields per second. But specifics aside, this game looks absolutely amazing. My first time playing The Bouncer, like most of you, was on a CRT monitor, which meant I couldn't make out a lot of detail, but facial animations were smooth as hell, and hair had a cool transparent effect in certain parts, but there's much more going on here than simple PS2 transparency meshes. There's a really cool quirk that most people probably won't know about unless they upscaled this game. As most of you guys know, I run all of my old consoles through the FrameMeister for some stunning 1080p video, and oftentimes that means making certain flaws and workarounds a lot more noticeable, which is definitely the case here. First off, we have the limitations of early development kits for the PS2. For some reason I've never been able to figure out, early hardware had devs using a 240-line front buffer, essentially halving the console's output resolution. A nice way to get around this at the time was to alternate between odd and even scan lines, an effect that actually looked really good in motion, but kinda messes with the FrameMeister's adaptive deinterlacing. When characters are far away from the screen, you can see this workaround doesn't combine well with the way the game scales assets. It looks like there's blank gaps every other vertical line, something that's kind of annoying if you're looking for it, but nothing to put the game down over. The next really cool trick is actually related to the last one. The field rendering method we just talked about was a great way to skirt dev kit limitations, but it had the upside, or I guess downside depending on your perspective, of making a very sharp but very aliased picture. To combat this, Dream Factory implemented what seems to be some kind of a baked-in anti-aliasing solution. What they did was double every horizontal pixel on the outline of a character, and these pixels had a near-transparent effect applied to them. If we zoom in right here, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. I'd say this achieved the intended effect really well, since viewing this on a CRT at its intended resolution makes these transparent pixels appear to fill in the gaps, effectively masking the stair-stepping you might be able to see otherwise. Sadly, it doesn't work as well when revealed by the upscaling process, but hey, that's the price we pay for some upscaled analog video, right? And now that we're done with the compliments and odd quirks, we should probably talk about why people might be a little justified in trashing this one, and I'm going to warn you ahead of time, this is probably going to be a pretty big list. Like I said before, you can't exactly expect the game's mechanics to perform in any way reliably. The physics and wild animations means that even a fight you've completed several times still stands a pretty good chance of completely bodying you. For some ridiculous reason, you take much more damage when you're hit on the ground, and even more than that when you get hit by one of your teammates. So no matter how good you are, you might still get the shit kicked out of you on the simplest of fights, which means getting kicked back to the title screen and reloading your last save, because in their infinite wisdom, Dream Factory thought the game would be better without a retry option on death. Now luckily you can skip cutscenes, but the bouncer takes what should be one long scene and breaks it into sometimes as many as 5 separate cutscenes. This means manually skipping and waiting for each one to load in. What I'm about to show you is completely unedited footage of me skipping all of the cutscenes after the game's first major boss fight. Trust me, it's absolutely fucking insane.
Apparently, I have underestimated.
Needless to say, this is an absolute pain and doesn't go well with the fact that before you get your bearings, you'll probably be dying a lot. So you'll be dealing with this a lot more than you'd like, and sadly, a lot of people just don't understand how to play this game, and trust me when I say, this is not their fault. There is nothing in the game aside from sheer trial and error to let you know that you should stay away from buying special moves until you've leveled up each of your stats 3 or so times. I can understand a reviewer throwing the game down in frustration when they're forced to restart because the final boss is unbeatable and they can't change where they've spent their points. Plus, even when you realize this, you still have to get used to some unwieldy controls and mechanics. Now, having said that, I know I'm not painting a good picture for the bouncer, but even despite these very real flaws, I still have a great time playing this game. After you've wrapped your head around how the fights work, and once you've got a max level character, you can really have fun with the combat. And on a more nerdy level, the setting just screams street-level modern JRPG. I absolutely love it. Honestly, I think everyone needs to give this one a second chance. Yes, it is flawed, but no one's perfect, and if they were, this show would cease to exist. So in my opinion, The Bouncer is a great experience, an awesome launch title, and most importantly, a trashed classic. Hey guys, thanks for hanging out. If you like underrated PS2 games with the Squaresoft logo on the cover, I have just the video for you right here on screen. And if you want to support more videos just like this, feel free to swing by my Patreon page and join the ranks of some of the best people here on them internets. Well, that's it for now, but hopefully I'll see all of you again in the next one.